So this is going to be your Corinthian shading video. I'm going to use colored pencil on this one, just so that you guys can see a little bit of variety. And I'm going to be using mostly blues and purples, maybe a little bit of orange. But basically, I'm going to be focusing on this portion. Because, once again, the band portions and the fluting portions are done pretty much the same way they were on the other two examples. So for this one, I'm going to put my light source up here. So now this side of my column is where all the lighter values will be. And then this side is where all of my darker values will be. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up my blue. I'm going to start on the darker side. And this part, because it is under that sort of fold of the leaf, is where my darker value is going to be. So I'm actually just going to shade sort of here and then press down less and less as I move across that little space. Build up with a second layer. And one fun thing about colored pencil is that you absolutely can mix the colors. So like if I wanted to make that shadow seem even darker, I could mix in a little bit of black. I could even mix in a little bit of green or purple. Really, any other dark colored pencil would help me make that spot even darker. So just making sure that my values are nice and smooth. And then I will actually go ahead and put a little bit of purple in here so that you guys can see how it does make it a little darker. It does not make it look purple because the blue is there. All it does is darken that blue a little bit. So then this part is going to be lighter on this side. So I'm going to go to this little corner spot and kind of shade that one across. And the whole thing is going to be lighter than the spot under it because it's on top. And I'm going to leave a little bit of white at the bottom for that reflected light that I keep talking about to separate the two darkest parts of that spot. So then on the next one, I'm just going to use a different blue just so that you can see some of the other colors. Same thing, going to start here on my dark spot. And if you were using a regular pencil, each of these different colors that I am adding into the shadows would just be another layer in which you press down harder with your pencil. It's the same exact concept, same idea. And then here, if I wanted to make it a little darker in the corner, I could actually add just that darker blue again. And you'll see that it does not change the blue. It still is that teal-y kind of blue, but it does darken up that little spot. Zoom in just a smidge more if I can. And then up here, same thing on the first one. Getting lighter as I move across, leaving that white there. And at the very end, once you have colored pretty much everything, then you can definitely, at that point, erase some of these extra pencil marks that you don't need. So I'm going to go ahead and move on up. I'm going to use my purple now. Still the same concept. Putting my darkest value along the edge here where that shadow is. And remember, you do want to make sure you are looking at your reference image, Because when you are shading, it's important to be looking at an example, since you don't memorize or just kind of know where the shadows and highlights are. It depends on what you're looking at. So the example that I'm looking at is the one that I'm using. Now this one, because it does go behind the two little blue ones, is going to extend down with that darker purple into that sort of space between. And then I'm going to fade it into the rest of the gradient here so that it still has a nice smooth transition. But it's going to be mostly dark on the bottom. And then just like I used the purple to make a shadow in the blue, I'm going to use my darker blue to sort of darken that purple. So I'm just going to darken it a little bit more with my blue in the darkest places. So then each one of these little leaves or petals would be done pretty much the same way. The swirls up here would be done the same way they were on the Ionic, same as these two swirls. But then this part would basically be done the same way these petals and leaves are. So essentially it's a lot of repetition. The main thing to pay attention to is where your light source is. So on this side, for instance, because of where my light source is, I will be using shading just a little bit differently. So I'm still going to have the darkest part be right in here, sort of under where the fold is, and then it's still going to get lighter moving down, but it's going to get lighter a little bit faster because it is so close to the light source. The inside here that goes behind things is still going to be darkest and get lighter as I move up. So it's very, very similar. And then since that is a light green, I'm going to go back in with a darker green and just darken a little bit of that up. Once again, mostly just focusing to where those darkest parts are. And then on this part, it's going to be to where the left is still the darkest. So now we're just kind of shading the other part of that fold, so that your lightest part is still on the same side as the light source. So the same concept applies, it's just a slightly different order of things because of where the light source is there. So I'll show you just a little bit more up here. So this one, for instance, is going to be darkest down here. It's this big swirly thing. It's going to be pretty dark down here. And it's going to get lighter as I move up toward that light source. Going to be darker again in here where that sort of curl goes on top of it. And then again get lighter moving this way toward the light source. So that it might just look something like that. And again, if I wanted to darken that section, I could just use some red. and just go directly over what I've just done with the orange, and all it's going to do is darken it a bit. And like I said, if you are using a regular pencil on a Corinthian column, the only thing different is that instead of adding other colors to darken, you just add other layers. And then once again on my swirly, going to be darkest furthest away and get lighter each time I move towards the light source. And again, you can erase pencil lines once you are finished with shading everything, because sometimes you have a pencil line sort of where you have a highlight and you just don't really want it there. You can carefully erase that. Pencil lines that are near shadows are not as big a deal because, as you can see here, I'm covering them up with my darker value. So then the same thing over here is going to be darker further away from my light source, and get lighter and lighter as I move across and towards that light source. And I'm going to smooth it out by going the other way. So they get a nice smooth transition from dark to light in there. And once again, it's lightest closest to my light source. Just going to darken that darkest space with a little bit of red. And then that might be kind of finished for that particular part. So I know I'm jumping all around a little bit on this particular column, but that is just so that you can see all the different steps that are different from the others. This one here is going to be treated very similarly to the center of the swirly and the nubs we did on the ionic. So it's going to get lighter moving towards the light source. Rounded shading so that it looks nice and round. But then also darkest down here where it is sort of in the crevice. And then lighter moving up from there. So that you still get some good roundness in it, but it's kind of hidden a bit. And then I'm going to actually use some purple. Make sure I've got the purple, not the blue. Use some purple in the shading to make that darker in those sort of darkest places. So now you've seen a little bit of the different techniques that you will need for the Doric, for the Ionic, and for the Corinthian. So hopefully between those videos and your own ability and imagination and willingness to try things, you'll be able to complete your shading on any of the columns you pick. So just again, here are our Doric and our Ionic. And like I said, I will continue working on these during class. That way you can kind of see how they progress, but I will not be filming more videos at this point on these three columns because I think you have enough material to use the techniques I've shown you and figure it out.